What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zephyr, and today I am bringing you a very spicy concoction, and that is of course Yubel or Lichbel, whichever one you want to go for. Basically the idea of this particular build is to utilise the control aspect of the Eldlich monsters and of course its trap cards alongside with the normal summoner capabilities and of course the whole board control with the super poly element of Yubel. Now, if you'd like to see a pure Eldlich version of this deck, then let me know and I'll be more than happy to update it. But basically the only difference, or the main difference, is all of the Yubel cards that I will show you in this build are basically utilised into the best trap cards of the format. And I thought, let's shake it up. Let's give this deck a bit of a makeover. Let's see what it can do with the two combined. So with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more upcoming content. We're going to dive headfirst into the profile to show you exactly what we've got and explain why we've got it. I'm going to start off with the Eldlich cards themselves and then we'll work our way into Yubel so you can kind of see the split between the two. So you start off with 2 of Eldlich the Golden Lord. You can place it free if you want to, but the only reason or the way that I would say to play it free is if you are massively fearful that your local environment is utilising more bestials or just more graveyard banishment in the form of stuff like DD Crows and Ghost Spells. But 2 is more than enough, and the reason that this can kind of come back into the fold is because bestials are less of a factor, because the main tier 0 format that we are going into is obviously more focused around fire. We've then got triple cursed Eldland. Now, arguably, you could cut this down to 2 if you want to, and another card you could cut out completely if you felt like it is the Geist Grinder Golem, and these would then ultimately become either more board breakers, more control cards, or just more hand traps. It really is up to you. We've then got 2 Haquero. Now, in the upcoming format, or the current format that we are in, when it is all about Fire Kings and not wanting to destroy their cards, you're probably going to be wanting to utilise Haquero more than you will be playing Conquistador, which is why I've gone with a 2-and-2 ratio rather than what would usually be considered as a 3-and-1 or a 3-and-2 ratio. The idea is that yes, of course, you can utilise these being on the board. You can very easily play Pallades in the extra deck if you want to. I'm personally not. I'm utilising these as link fodder, but you can also use them as fusion fodder as well. But the idea is more times than not, you're going to be destroying an opponent's card with this one, and you're going to be banishing one from the graveyard with this one, which only becomes your form of DD Crow. Then, of course, we've got 2 Eldlich Sanguine. Now, what you've got to keep in mind when you are utilising the Eldlich cards with an additional engine that is not zombie is that with Sanguine and, of course, Cursed Eldland, you cannot attack with monsters that are not zombies while it's face up on the field, so you get rid of it, and that's when you're going to get an additional search or a set. And then Sanguine is you lock yourself into summoning zombies for the rest of the turn when you use it to summon Eldlich the Golden Lord from the deck. So this is one of the ones that you need to make sure that when you use your Super Poly, you're using that first, and then you're going to use Scarlet Sanguine, because the last thing you want to do is use this, and then your Super Poly becomes 99.9% dead. And the reason that of that 0.1% is because you could very easily be playing your Eldlich the Mad Golden Lord as an option as well. So that's pretty much it for the Eldlich cards. Relatively fine-tuned. I'm still waiting for the day that we can get like an Eldlich monster, an additional supporting Eldlich monster, which would be really kind of cool. But most of them seem to want to be fitting into the trap cards. But I do want to see Eldlich support directly. Now, not just normal zombie support, which would also be amazing, but something that specifically helps you with the Eldlich matchup would be really kind of cool. Then, of course, moving on to the Yubel cards. The Yubel cards are going to be a little bit more dominant in this build because it will utilise its normal summon aspect of the kind of deck and its general mechanics. Like I said, if you wanted to change this up to be more Eldlich focused, you can then put into the Giant Soldier or the Rock Monster that protects all of your back row. It's completely escaped my mind of its name off the top of my head. But the idea is you do that, you would then play stuff like Extravagance rather than Prosperity because you're ideally trying to draw into your control factored cards. So moving on to the Yubel monsters, so we're going with triple Samsara D Lotus. This is your ideal normal summon of the deck alongside your Dark Beckoning Beast. Now, obviously, both of these, well, Samsara D Lotus can be summoned off of 1-for-1. You can play Puri Rizimap if you wanted to, and if you were to do something like that, you'd probably cut the Lotus down by 1. But the idea is because this deck does not rely on the normal summon heavily, you can utilise this more times than not. In your side deck, that's when you can start playing stuff like your Inspector Border to make the deck more stun and more control if you're going first. But you can also shift it to be more board breaking and more kind of aggressive going second as well. So you get the best of both worlds when you've got what could be considered as an aggressive engine in Yubel and then a defensive engine in Eldlich. It does give you a nice little swap up, which is something that I've always been looking forward to building. And I remember the closest that I ever got is I did Shadol Bujin back in the day, and I also did Fire King Fire King Fire Fist, I believe, and the whole premise was I would really like a 15 card extra deck that you could be playing one type of deck, so like one deck in the form of just playing Boujins, switch out 15 cards, and then you're playing a Shadol deck. So it's a really kind of cool switcheroo kind of aspect, which I think you can get away with on this build. So obviously triple Samsara D Lotus and Dark Beckoning Beast. You can play Dark Beckoning Beast at 3 and then Samsara at 1, but the idea is that your Samsara is your Yubel card. This is going to utilize Link Karibo more. It's also going to allow you to utilize stuff like Relinquish Anima. If you wanted to rely on Dark Beckoning Beast more, you would then put Salamangreat Almirage in your extra deck. And the benefit of something like that is it gives you a fire monster to go into Heater if you are in that particular type of environment. But then you need to be careful because you're also putting a fire monster in your graveyard for your opponent to take to go into Promethean Princess. Then, of course, we do play triple Spirit of Yubel. This is like your most ideal Yubel monster off of the back of Samsara because ideally this is going to lead you into everything else you need. We've then got the one Geist Grinder Golem. Now, again, you can very easily get rid of it. It's just one of the ones that if you search it or if you're able to hard open it and then give it to your opponent straight away, especially in the Eldlich matchup, you don't need to worry about Lightning Storm. You don't need to worry about Evenly Matched, which could be two massively devastating cards for the matchup or for specifically your Eldlich cards themselves, as well as giving you the ability to gain life points and guarantee you're going to be able to do damage to your opponent. A card you could very easily swap this out for would, of course, be Nibiru. Nibiru can be massively helpful because you give your opponent a very strong monster that you can ram one of your Yubel monsters into and then deal the damage to your opponent. So that's one of the hand traps I would highly consider, and that's what you would be taking out if you wanted to adapt anything else in the deck and go for that itself. For the Yubel lineup, of course, you are playing the one original Yubel, the one Terra Incarnate, and then, of course, the one Ultimate Nightmare. You could arguably take out the Ultimate Nightmare if you wanted to, just because you'd want to balance with more of the Eldlich cards than the Yubel cards, but that really does come down to personal preference. Ideally, playing one of each is ideal because it gives you that additional monster that floats onto the board, as well as kind of circling around this card here. The only time this card ever becomes an issue is if it gets banished face down and you can't recycle it, but everything else, being banished face up, being in the graveyard, is all utilised, and that's when you're going to be able to utilise stuff like Spirit of Yubel, while also being able to bring it back from the graveyard, loop around and do everything you need to. For the Yubel spells, we're playing 2 Nightmare Pain, 1 Mature Chronicle, and 1 Eternal Favourite. Now, obviously, if you're going down more of a pure Yubel route, you'd probably want to consider playing 2 of this and definitely like 3 of the Nightmare Pain. But ideally, it's one of them cards that once you get it, you're golden, and more times than not, you'd want to be searching this out. Some people don't play the Mature Chronicle, completely understandable, but I do like that ability, especially when Eldlich the Golden Lord is a level 10, that when you're able to use its effect to bring back original Yubel from the graveyard, that could be the difference of making Gustav Max for the duel or Gustav Max for time and losing the duel in general. Then moving on to the last monster that we play in the deck, and that is, of course, the one Unchained Soul of Shayama. I didn't really want to focus on the Unchained part of the deck as much, which is why I'm not playing a bigger involvement. The idea is that you're literally going to be going into Yama if you need to, offer the Sacred Beast package, get this card to your hand, discard it as fodder, get Yubel to the board, use the effect of this, destroy Yubel, float around again, and then get into an Unchained Soul of Rage. So you're just adding an additional line of interruption to your board, and then when your opponent is having to deal with a Rage going into a SP Little Knight, which is incredibly powerful because not only are you link fusing or linking with one of your opponent's special monsters, you're then banishing one of their cards, and then when they activate another card or effect, you're banishing another one. So you're basically getting 3 forms of interruption from one card off of the back of the Sacred Beast, which is really, really important. And then you add to that your Sanguine, your Super Poly, Eldlich the Golden Lord, Conquistador, Haquero, you name it. You're just then adding more control. And then when it comes back to your turn, you're then adding more aggression to help you push for an OTK. We've then got 2 of the Spirit Gates. Again, quite like the Nightmare Pain. It's one of the ones that when I've played it, and I've played 3 Sacred Beast and 3 of this, it does become very, more of an issue. Like, if anything, I would rather play 3 of the Sacred Beast than 3 of the opening, because if you open up opening, you search out Sacred Beast searches out the second copy, that's pretty much it. Whereas if you open up the Sacred Beast, you go Sacred Beast, search out opening, activate opening, get your second Sacred Beast, bang, straight away, that is your link 2 into Yama. Yama gets you to search, you've got the discard fodder and everything else you need from that point on. So, if anything, Sacred Beast up to 3, but a 2-and-2 ratio works out quite nicely. And then for the board breaker, the best board breaker in the game, Super Poly right now. So many decks are naturally running into this when you're also using a card like Yubel that has, in my opinion, one of the best Super Poly targets in the entire game because it's just all of your opponent's monsters if you want it to be. This can be very, very helpful. So Super Poly maxed out at 3. Of course, you do play your staple targets that you can adapt to the environment as well. 2 Pot of Prosperity. Obviously, in a pure Eldlich version, you can play extra because you don't care about your extra deck at all. But because we're utilising Super Poly and we're also trying to utilise other link monsters like the Yama, you want to be selective on what you're banishing. So Prosperity is the best target for you. Then 2 Trill Tactics talents. So as you can see, we've gone more focused on control with our back row rather than hand traps going first, and then board breakers in the form of talents and Super Poly for going second. Yes, of course, it will be a little bit weaker against control decks, but when you're looking at the current format right now, stuff like Labyrinth is not as applicable. Like, it's not as vibrant, I suppose that's the right word, maybe not, as featured in the current meta. Like, a lot of it is 99% Fire Kings, and of course, in the forms of Voiceless Voice. So being able to utilise Super Poly and of course Trill Tactics against both of those matchups is going to be more effective for you than being able to utilise maybe something like Dusters or Lightning Storms. And then of course we've got the 1 Call by the Grave just to kind of help you deal with hand traps. Yes, there is kind of like a little loop element where you can run into Draw and Lockbird, you can run into specific hand traps, but the idea is that when you go through your Yubel route, you'll probably pull out the Ash Blossom, which means your Sanguine is then free to run rampant, and then vice versa as well. So that's it for the entire main deck. Like I said, if you wanted to adapt it to be a little bit more Eldlich focused or Yubel focused, then by all means you can do. But I haven't really seen this particular kind of concoction and combination online. It's more so all Eldlich or all Yubel, and I felt the pair of them together can actually work out really, really nicely. So moving on to the extra deck, of course, we are playing 2 Yubel, the Loving Defender. I said it when I first did the profile, pick this up as early as you possibly can. I highly advise picking up Yubel as early as you possibly could as well. Right now, a core is currently sitting at around about 70 quid. On release, they were about £50. These were dropped to £10, and then obviously with a bit more hype, they've gone up to £20 a copy, like £15 to £20. So grab them now, don't complain later. And then for your generic Super Poly targets, of course, you've got Garura and you've got your Mud Dragon. You would adapt this dependent on how effective Super Poly is in your environment. If you need to play Draco-esque, if you need to be playing the Agnista, then by all means put them in there. I do have a small selection of cards right here that I will be considering from the 15th slot of this extra deck. I'm only going to show you 14, but then I'll show you the other options you have to put in for your last card as well. And then for the Link monsters, of course, we are playing the 1 Unchained Soul Rage, followed up by the Unchained Soul Yama, the Dark Charmer, SP Little Knight, IP Masquerena, and then Link Spider. Now, obviously, Link Spider is in here to turn your Conquistador or your Haquero into an effect monster, and then that can get you into SP Little Knight. It's not really the end of the world if you're not attacking directly that turn, but the idea is you kind of want to be using your Yama into Rage into SP Little Knight, or if you need to go down the generic route, because this just requires 2 non-link monsters, and if you don't go through Spider or you hold this one back, you can go into IP Masquerena, and then IP can get into SP, and again, you get in that banish on summon. The Dark Charmer, again, is just another way where you can make a monster, steal it from your opponent, and then go into SP Little Knight. And if you wanted to go in for higher link monster options, you can do as well. Again, that comes down to the 15th slot in the extra deck. For the XYZs, we're playing 2 main XYZ monsters in the form of Rail Cannon Gustav Max. This is your 2k burn that can be made with 2 Eldlich the Golden Lords, but of course it can also be made with 2 Yubel monsters, ideally Spirit and of course Yubel itself, or one of each. Now this is going to give you the option to burn your opponent for 2k if it does get close to time, but it also helps you complete the OTK with Yubel as well as being able to go into a Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Juggernaut, which will allow you to attack all of your opponent's monsters once each. So another option you could go into is the Link to Pentastag, which will allow you to utilise piercing on this one. Just a correction on what I said about this doesn't allow you to attack all of your opponent's monsters once each. It allows you to attack your opponent up to the number of times it has material +1. So it's very kind of cool to be able to go, okay, cool, I've got 3 materials to it, Gustav Max, and then detach 1 off of Gustav Max, meaning it's got 2 materials, so it can attack twice at 4k. Detach a material to make it out of the 6k, that's enough to kind of push you in for game, should you need it. Another one, of course, is the Sky Slayer Typhoon, just as a kind of fallback. But keeping in mind, if you put an Eldlich the Golden Lord on the board, you're going to have to rank this on top of your Eldlich the Golden Lord, which doesn't really help you that much. For the 15th slot, it really comes down to the environment and what you want to play, but these will also utilise extra deck slots as well. So for the fusion monsters, you could consider Eldlich the Mad Golden Lord. This would be more useful if you are playing Zombie World in your side deck, and the reason you'd be playing a card like that is because you can utilise it against a Flundereeze matchup, as well as being able to give your opponent a zombie, or if they're playing higher level monsters like the Fire King matchup, you can use their monsters as Super Poly target to get you into a boss monster like this. Dark Law again requires a side deck, and that would be Master Change 2, and that's when you can turn any of your Sacred Beast or of course your Lotus into a Dark Law, which is a great option for this format. One that is probably going to go into more times than not is Link Karibo as a defensive option or an aggressive option in the form of Relinquish Anima, and you're going to be turning your Samsara D Lotus into either one of these. But again, it's very specific because ideally you want to be tributing off your Samsara D Lotus. You don't really want to leave it on the board. But at the very least, you can go Samsara D Lotus, it gets negated, you go into Anima, you steal one of your opponent's monsters. If you've come off of the back of the Sacred Beast engine, you then just link up and you can go into cards like Yama and everything else that you might need to. Not Yama, sorry. You can go into stuff like Dark the Dark Charmer and then work your way up into an SP Little Knight. And the reason you'd then go into Yama is if you just go into your 2 Fiend monsters. So you're getting the best of what you need to, but these are just kind of like your last 4 options depending on what you want to add to the extra deck. So it's a bit of a... the Eldlich provides you the extra deck flexibility, whereas Yubel kind of allows you to focus more on the super poly targets, and then you can adapt some of the Fiend targets depending on the type of build that you want to go for. So that's it for the entire profile and, of course, the main deck and everything else. Side deck really comes down to the local environment. Like I said, you can switch the deck up to be more control and you'd kind of minimize down your Yubel engines. You can switch the deck up to be more aggressive, and in doing so, what you would do is you'd switch out some of your Eldlich cards, and that's when you can put in more specific hand traps like Drolls, DD Crows, Lightning Storms, everything else like that. So you're kind of balancing what you want to and the overall outcome of the entire deck as well. Anyway, if you do have any questions at all, by all means, please put in the comments down below. I will be more than happy to answer them. But for now, as absolutely always, stay safe and, of course, happy dueling.